Good morning and welcome back to another car video. So today we're going to talk about how you can make a design look good, but still make it usable. Because that seems to be a big problem that beginners run into, is making a site usable or a UI usable, but at the same time, like not really sacrificing the aesthetics, right? Like making it look good, making it a nice portfolio piece, that kind of thing. So one of the first things you need to do, and it's going to sound pretty rudimentary, but the first thing you need to do is start with a good base. And that can be your user research. So in a perfect world, and we can't all do this, and I recognize that because I spent years creating sites that I then had to go back and like retrofit because we came to find out that it didn't work for one reason or another, right? I will tell you that you will have a much, much, much better project if you will just do the research before you begin. And what am I talking about with research? I'm saying finding out how your users actually use the UI. And it doesn't have to be super extensive to begin actually doing the design work and laying the groundwork, but you need to have a baseline of what are the main things that users tend to go for. And especially if you're like a new user or a new designer going into a website redesign, right? You may not feel like you have a lot of information, but if the site's existed for any length of time, it probably has analytics, hopefully Google Analytics, but they don't have it turned on for whatever reason. Sometimes their host will have analytics, and you can look into those things and just see what are the pages that seem to be most popular, and then you can go in and look at, you know, what's going on with these sites. Alternatively, if you have a little bit of lead time, you can turn on something like Hotjar, hotjar.com. I believe it's free. Is it free? I think it's free. And you can add that to your site and give it like a month. If however much time you have is however long your research lead time is going to be. I mean, let's be realistic, right? Like if you've got a week to complete this, maybe you only get a couple days worth of stuff. But when you start to go to those pages and you see, especially with Hotjar, you'll be able to see exactly what people looked at, what did they click on, that kind of thing. And what it does is it tells you how your existing user base is using the current product. And you'll be able to see things that are important to the users, so you'll know to keep those things front and center. And you'll also know kind of where it's lacking, right? Like, why don't they ever go to this part of the page, or what are they not seeing? And those kinds of tools, analytics, and things like Hotjar, which is kind of like a heat mapping software for websites, when you start to see where people are getting hung up, you'll be able to make better decisions. So that's my first and foremost. Again, not everybody gets the luxury of starting with user research. It's just the way it is. It's not right, but it's the way it is. But it is the correct way to do things. So if you can take the time, make the case to your employer and say, hey, before I do this project, let me see what users are actually doing, and that will help a lot. If you have any experts in your field that you can talk to and kind of glean for the whatever that you're working on, that can work in a pinch too. You can go to them directly and say, hey, it's like, what is it that people are trying to accomplish? What is it they're trying to do? And that will help you set up your sites better. So for this example, I'm going to talk a lot about like articles, website things, that kind of thing. But this put in project here, basically, right? Like I need to have something so I can show you the examples of what I'm talking about. So that's what we're going with, is websites and setting up like a page on a website. So we are going to talk about like how to skirt the problem. I'm looking at my notes, sorry. So yeah, start with the UX and then move on. So the next one was do the low frill stuff first. And it's going to sound silly, but doing the wireframes and the not pretty and not fun part of design first, it does a couple things. The first thing it does is it lets you know if you can fit the whole thing on the darn page, right? So you can, now that you hopefully are armed with some user research, if you're not and you have to start at the stage, it's okay. Like we have all been there. Don't be upset. Just know that it's probably going to cause rework, that you're going to have to go back and redo it once you do find out how users are doing it, right? So, but if you have to start with just a wireframe. Title goes at the beginning of the page. There's going to be subheadings. I need to put in my call to action here. Let's say it's a sign up for my email newsletter section, right? Whatever it needs to be, get all your pieces. Organize where those pieces are going to go before you ever start. And then if you have the luxury of leaning on somebody else, ask somebody else to take a quick look and just say, hey, if you are trying to accomplish end goal, what do you think? And it's kind of like a testing, right? So you're not always going to have these kinds of luxuries, but if you have somebody to lean on and ask, it's a good starting point. Hold please. So I parked in a different spot this time, trying to be a little bit more like secluded and not have the sun blazing in my face like I did in the last video. I didn't realize that it was so bright. It didn't look like that in the camera. It just looked like in the recording. And I still had somebody come over. Oh well, it is what it is. That's what we do when we don't have time to edit long videos, right? We do stuff in our car and post it, so it gets done. All right, so the other thing I was going to suggest was if you don't have access to, hold on. Okay, I know what this was. If you don't have access to finding out placement and things, I forgot, I should have mentioned this in the previous section. If you really are just kind of like you're a freelancer and you're doing this by yourself and you don't have anybody to run this across, use a tool like an AI tool like ChatGTP. And the way that you do it is you ask ChatGTP, or is it HChatGPT? You know what I'm talking about. An AI bot that you can go pop your question into. When you go and do that, you want to ask them things like, what are the top 5 things in this industry? Or what does this kind of user look for in this kind of thing? And what it will do is it will give you like a bulleted list of kind of what this particular situation apparently tends to return. And I say apparently because it is wrong sometimes. Sometimes what you're trying to do is really based on your specific subset of a group. And that might look different than the generalized answer. But if you don't have a place to start, getting that generalized answer just so that you can get your elements mapped out on paper, incredibly helpful. So don't knock it. It's a tool like anything else, right? So just know that it is imperfect information, but it is enough information to get you started. So there's that. But once you've laid out everything on that page, you know what your elements are. You have everything on there. You've taken steps to verify. Maybe you send the wireframes to your customer and you're asking them, is anything missing? Do I have everything that I need to do here? And that right there sets you up for success, because they might realize, and a lot of customers are not very visual. It's just the truth, right? So that's why they hired you. So when you, and a customer can be your boss too, just, insert name here. But what happens is they might recognize that they forgot something, or if they're giving you the approval to move forward, then that there might be rework down the line, but you'll be able to close out this project. So you'll still be able to be successful in the endeavor that you're trying to do. So once you have everything mapped out on the page, the last step is, of course, to make it pretty. If you are working with an existing UI, you hopefully already have like a style guide that you can pull through. You'll have elements that already exist throughout the rest of the site. Now, whether or not those things are pretty or they are well done is a different matter. But you know what your user is expecting when they come to your site or your UI, right? User interface. When they come to your setup, there are usually, because if you're working with a pre-existing customer, there are pre-established things that users that use the site have been trained to look for. And let me give you an example. Let's say you use blue buttons for everything, right? It's like a light teal, it's really pretty, that kind of thing. But this particular page, you would read that red buttons, which is true, and that's why I'm using this example, red buttons get people to click more. A lot of sales pages you'll see when you go to like those weird sales funnels that go on like forever, the buttons are sometimes usually red. And the reason that they're red is because in case studies, red gets clicked on more. However, your users are used to light teal buttons. So if you go in and you're like, I'm going to use a red button because I read this thing where red buttons work better, you're not wrong. But your users might not find the button because you have trained them to look for a teal button. So if they know that your process includes this teal button, they just have blindness when they come to your site and they're looking for a teal button, but they can only find red ones. It sounds ridiculous, but you gotta remember, people don't read websites. They just don't. Every person who's ever used an internet or used the internet scans. That's how they look at things on the internet. They just want to get to the thing they need to go, and then when they've narrowed it down enough, they'll read. But that's the end of the process. They start with just looking at, excuse me, I'm trying not to sneeze. They start with just scanning. So if they scan right past your button because your button isn't there and available, you're just going to miss it. You're going to lose that opportunity with that customer. Or if it's somebody that's forced to use your UI, like it's part of like a software program, they will get upset and they get frustration. And remember how frustration works with UIs, right? The reason that we're so concerned with consistency and we're so concerned with mapping things out in a user-friendly way is because the attention span is very short on the internet, but so is the frustration span. So when you go in and you are clicking on something, it will get frustrated if it click it and it doesn't do anything. Like it's like a server lag time, right? Then let's say I'm trying to find something and it doesn't come up, right? That's a frustration. Maybe it doesn't come up because I did a search for it on the page, like Control F, and the keyword that I looked for wasn't the same language as, and by language I mean like the word that was used, not like a different language. But the language that was on the paper or on the page was not what I as a user tend to use in my everyday life. So that's another frustration. Then let's say I go to check out, but there's like extra steps for me to being able to, instead of view cart and check out, I have view cart. Well, a new page, now enter your address. New page, confirm this other aspect. Do you want to join our newsletter? Like putting steps in people's way. That's what I'm getting at. Like all those little things is frustration. Now they still might be happy that they bought your product or they got to their end goal, whatever that end goal might be. But you've dragged them through the mud a little bit trying to get there. So it's the frustration level. So you have little thing. By the time they get to the end, they just want to be done with your site. And that creates a bad user experience. So, or customer experience, because you want them to come back and buy from you again, right? If in terms of a sales pitch. So you want to avoid those little things because in the end, it really does add up to the whole experience. Even if it's a short timed experience, right? Even if it's only a couple of minutes long, if they know every time they have to go into the site to do this thing, they're going to have to click 49 buttons, or they're going to have to scan, or you word things differently than the other people in the industry might. It all adds up. So you just really got to know where your users are coming from. And now, getting back to making it pretty, having the style guide and everything in place and making it consistent throughout your site. So that whole spiel was just about making your site consistent and easy to use. The prettiness part of it, you have to make sure you're meeting your users where they're at. So the first, oops, you got to see a shed because I clicked the wrong button. Hold on. All right, I think my settings are back to the way they should have been. Yeah, so making your site look pretty. It does come back to making sure that you're matching the rest of the site. And so you're going to have parameters, right? If you give somebody, a designer, a blank page, this is a perfect example. You give somebody, a designer, a blank piece of paper, and you said, hey, go make a piece of art. What am I making the art about? Does it need to be small or large? Does it need to fill the whole page or just a piece of the page? What kind of medium should I use? You see what I'm getting at? The more framework you give yourself, the better art you're going to be able to create, and the happier your client will be, because you worked within certain parameters. There is an outline and there's a measure for success. So doing all that stuff in the beginning is part of the design work. It's discovery, it's making sure, it's defining things, it's identifying the technologies and getting everything the way it needs to be. So the make it pretty part is actually pretty quick. And I will tell you, industry standards have always been things like hero graphics. It kind of depends too on if you're more of a technical site or if you're more of a like entertainment or feel good kind of site, right? Like if I'm trying to sell people on fitness, I want to have as many opportunities for showing people getting fit, success stories as I can in an article blog that I might be laying out. So I'll use a lot of heavy pictures. Also, folks want to be able to read things in bite-sized pieces, and that's true across any industry. People want chunks of data to read. They don't want to read the novel all at once. They want to read this little thing and then that little thing and this little thing. So breaking your site up can lend itself to looking pretty, and it gives you more opportunities to add in things like images and graphs and visual representations of what they would be reading. All of those things keep the user engaged, right? So the more of those kinds of things you do, yes, the longer the page gets, but we have seen study after study after study that people don't care about scrolling. They care about clicking. So think how much you doom scroll, right? Like on Instagram or whatever, right? It is part of culture now. People do not care about scrolling. I bet you if you were able to map how much pixels real estate space you burn through when you do one session of doom scrolling, you would be blown away, right? It would be pages and pages and pages and pages. And it just comes to, people don't care about looking at additional information. They don't want to wait and they don't want to click, because clicking means that they have to wait for a new page to load and they have to get reacquainted with their surroundings and then they have to move forward. So don't be afraid to make your pages long. That will make it pretty. And I hope this kind of helps bridge the gap between usability and aesthetics, because aesthetics are important. Creating a consistent design throughout everything that you do is really important. It will tend, when you do this kind of method, it will tend to be maybe not as flashy as it could have been, right? But it's also going to go further. Your work will be better because you have given yourself these parameters within to work in, right? So it is a balance. You don't want to go too far off the rails, because sticking with what works, right? So you don't want to go too far and, introduce a bunch of new elements on each page, or adding in maybe like a new technology that the user hasn't experienced somewhere else on your site. Being consistent with how you present your content is what's going to get you over the goal line and make you be balanced between pretty and usable at the same time. So you can build a gorgeous design if you have those usability things set in place first. So I hope that helps. It really does come down to just being prepared before you do your design, and then you'll be able to be creative. And you'll be surprised what you can come up with too, just because you had all the basics already outlined. So if this was helpful, please give a like. Actually, take that back. would you please subscribe? Because I am trying to get the subscriber count up on this site, or on YouTube, and that would be really helpful, and I appreciate it. If not, I will see you guys next week. All right, take care.